This is After the Fact from the Pew Charitable Trusts. I'm Dan LeDuc. London is a city in motion. After a decline in population following the Second World War, the city's population is now at a record 8.5 million people, and it's expected to pass 9 million by the year 2021. And here's the thing that says a lot about London and about the world. 70% of babies now born in London have at least one foreign-born parent. Think about that. 7 in 10 babies born in London have at least one parent that wasn't. That's our data point for this episode. And you'll recall it was also our data point for our previous episode as well. That's because we're continuing our look at the world's changing demographics. Last time, we spoke with the Pew Research Center's Mark Hugo Lopez, who explained current global migration trends. You can listen to that conversation wherever you get your podcasts. In this second part of our look at global migration, we traveled to London. We wanted to see up close how the movement of millions of people around the globe can be seen in one place. We went to Brixton, where Ben Rogers, director of the Centre for London, was our guide. The Centre is an independent think tank that studies the city's trends, and its research led to the findings about births and foreign-born parents. Ben Rogers walked us through the streets of Brixton, that's grown from a quintessential South London neighborhood into a dense multicultural hub. It's also home to Electric Avenue. So we're on Electric Avenue now. And so 100 years ago, we were seeing some of the first light bulbs in London, or would have been hanging over our heads.
That's right. It's been pedestrianised in the last 15 years. And then I suppose the other distinctive feature of Brixton is it's got quite an extensive sort of network of covered markets with lots of small stalls in it.
Denean Rowe, a development officer for the Centre for London, joined us on our walk. You live near here, right?
I did, yeah. So I live near here, it's about 10 minutes away, and I've grown up around here my whole life.
Oh, good.
So from Electric Avenue and pretty much the whole Brixton market, you can hear the music in the background, you can hear a lot of reggae, bashment, and Jamaican music, Caribbean foods all around here, authentic food. If you want to cook a meal from the Caribbean, you're either going to come to here or you're probably going to go to Peckham if you're in South London. Mm-hmm. But there used to be a lot of music stores with like vinyls where you could just hear the music screeching out all day long. And it was just vibrant. It was just a place, like I said, home away from home for lots of people.
My grandmother grew up not that far from here, born around 1900, and she remembers this as being a sort of, a place where you come to. There's a big department store that was considered to be rather glamorous. So I think she wouldn't recognise the Brixton of today.
Wow.
But I suppose one of the big changes is that though this was always a centre of migration, 30 or 40 years ago, there would have been a large number of migrants from a small number of countries. And what we've now seen is almost sort of the diversification of migration. So actually you've got a sort of huge array of different migrant groups represented in this area and in London as a whole. That's right.
So from where? Where are they coming from?
I'm tempted to say from everywhere.
Really?
I think that's pretty true, but traditionally Caribbean, but that's been now African, Eastern European, Western European. There's a big Portuguese population here.
So how much of this change is driven by migration?
A huge amount of it has been driven by migration, which is why now we're in a position where 70% of Londoners born today are born with at least one parent from overseas. It's also the case that migrant groups have a higher fertility rate. So even when migrants have been here for a generation, they're having more kids, which is an indirect effect of migration, I suppose.
Right, because they're here, they're staying, and they're having more children.
Yeah, and London's changed actually in a way which I think has even taken the experts, the demographers, by surprise. And I remember when we had the last census in 2010, it transpired that the proportion of white British people in London was now less than 50%, which no one was expecting. Mm-hmm. London was, a generation ago, London was declining population, or 2 generations ago. So it's a big change. It's one that's taken people by surprise. Recently we did a piece of work just looking at the official population projections for London, and they're just systematically wrong. Systematically wrong. Every 10 years they get it completely wrong.
Local historians have called the neighborhood the Black Capital of Europe. When Nelson Mandela visited London in 1996, he came to Brixton Before American actress Meghan Markle, who is biracial, married Britain's Prince Harry in May, she also visited Brixton. So we've just taken a stroll past Pop Brixton, which is this cool set of old containers and restaurants and shops and all that stuff. It's a terrific neighborhood. So let's pause for a moment and fill us in a little bit more on the bigger picture of London, the change that migration is making to the city at large, and what that portends here.
Well, maybe I'll begin by talking a bit about London's relationship to the rest of the country, because I think one of the most sort of striking developments of the last 20 years is the way in which sort of London has raced ahead, not just in population terms and not just in sort of diversity, but also economically from the rest of the country. Back in the 1970s, average per capita GDP in London was about 1.25 times what it is elsewhere. Now it's 1.75. So again, it's this sort of phenomenon of global cities powering ahead of their nations, and that's caused a lot of tension. It's a bit like relationships between the big US cities and the rest of the nation. Played out here in the Brexit elections with, I think, people feeling almost a sort of resentment or deep misgivings about the way in which power and prestige and sort of status and everything is concentrated
in these large cities.
And particularly in London. And then within London itself, of course, I can see if you're outside London and you look at the city, and it seems that the streets are paved with gold and that everybody's doing fantastically well. But if you dig deeper, what you see is a really rich city, incredible house prices, a lot of people certainly doing really, really well, but also in many ways a very divided city, and poverty remains stubbornly high, and child poverty and increasingly in-work poverty is a real phenomenon in London. And even people on average incomes have really suffered. So earnings have stagnated over the last decade and living costs have gone up. And actually we came up at Centre for London with this term ENDIES to describe this phenomenon of middle-class people who are struggling. ENDIES stands for employed, no disposable income or savings. And that's a real big city, but particularly a sort of London phenomenon.
The core of the city is drawn a great deal of wealth. The outer cores, as I understand it, is sort of where the less wealthy are settling. But what I've been trying to figure out is where does the middle live in London anymore? The cost of living has become so high.
That's a great question. So I think the pattern has really changed. I think the original London model, if you like, was at the centre was characterised by rich and poor living cheek by jowl. The sort of think of sort of Pygmalion, and right. that was the sort of London. Unlike Paris, where the rich always lived in the centre and the poor lived towards the outside, London was much more mixed up. And then, as the suburbs grew, the suburbs were generally sort of middle class, affluent. That story is changing a bit. Particularly when the suburbs are concerned, and we've seen a lot of poorer migrants being squeezed out as the centre of London or inner London has become more unaffordable, being squeezed out to outer London in a way which I think is storing up problems, not only because a lot of people who are still in outer London feel a bit sort of displaced or uneasy about the changes, but also because those new poorer migrants are having to move into rented accommodation. They still can't afford to buy their own homes. They don't have the sort of social networks and the other things that sort of traditionally supported them in inner London. So I do really worry about the sort of changing nature of outer London and some of the problems that we might be storing up for ourselves.
So there's been clearly an enormous change in the population of this city over the last few decades. Talk to us about the sort of just the current demographics of London. What's the city look like today, and by the numbers?
Well, London is growing fast, at least by European standards. Population of about 8.5 million, growing by 100,000 a year, or a million every decade, and in the way that demographers do, they're just projecting that into the future.
Yeah.
Then it's also become much more diverse. We're seeing a greater cleavage between wealthy property owners and those without property, and gradual to change in the economic geography of London, with inner London becoming more gentrified, more affluent, and outer London, which was traditionally the more affluent, or consistently affluent part of the city actually becoming in parts poorer.
And the projections are well over 9 million by when?
In the next 3 years,
And how
which
mu-
no one would have predicted, because the sort of the story of London is a city which declined in the post-war years, the years after the Second World War, encouraged by government policies. It was partly deliberate policy, but it was more just the collapse of industry and the decline of empire and the decline of Britain's economy. And then, in a way which no one expected, from the early 1990s, the economy and the population recovered. And it's been growing ever since.
Yet these global cities, whether they're London or Los Angeles, are always this beacon that draws a migrant population. Migrant populations, when they enter a new country, don't go out into the rural areas traditionally. They're really focused in these urban areas, like London. I mean, this has been true throughout history.
It is, and I think they work well if you're a migrant, partly because they're accepting of more accepting of migration, and there's already some networks there that can help you get integrate into the city. But in some ways, they are becoming tougher places for migrants, at least in economic terms. And there is this phenomenon which we see in London and also in US cities, which is sort of second or third generation migrants then move out because life is so tough within cities, and we're definitely seeing that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, up until, I suppose, quite a few years ago, you would have had grandparents sort of on the road much where we are now, a bit quieter. You would have had their children living in the same area, maybe one area away, and then their children sort of hoping to live not on the parents' doorstep, but still relatively close. You build your family here, you build your community here, but it's gotten really difficult with property prices and sort of gentrification coming in. It's tough to build that same community around you because we just can't afford to do it. And I think that is the source of a lot of tension, especially with people my age who want to be a part of the community that they've known and that their family has helped to build, but there just isn't the room for it and there just isn't the finance to do it.
In our visit here in Brixton and in London, I've been really struck by sort of the multiculturalism, all of the changes around us, and clearly so much of it is driven by people who have come from somewhere else, migration. Are we looking at the future here for not just London but elsewhere?
I'm always wary about predicting the future, and I'm sure the world will gradually become more diverse, but I'm not sure it's going to become gradually more happily multicultural. And in fact, we're living through a period of reaction against migration and against, in many ways, globalization, not just here in Britain. And the Brexit vote was a vote against globalization and in a way a vote against open borders. But I think in some ways London is a bit of an unusual story. So we've managed the process successfully here, but will we manage it successfully elsewhere? What does the future hold? I'm not sure we know.
We have a link to the Centre for London's report, London Identities, on our website at pewtrust.org/afterthefact. If this is your first time listening to us, click subscribe and browse through our episodes. We've covered such global topics as overfishing in Europe, the threat of antibiotic resistance, and how to protect the world's oceans. Our thanks to Ben Rogers and the Centre for London for showing us around Brixton. And thanks to you for listening. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc, and this is After the Fact.